Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. We didn't expect such a large crowd. I am one of the dwindling few senior Niseis who were interned here way back in 1942. On December 7, 1941, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. And on the next day, December 8th, Canada declared war against Japan, and suddenly the lives of the Japanese Canadians were in a turmoil, were turned upside down. We all had to quit school. I was in grade 5 at the time, and 630 Nisei students emptied half the school, half the Lord Strathcona school. On December 8th, the Canadian Navy immediately seized and confiscated 1,100 Japanese Canadian fishing boats, which were all towed up the Fraser River to a collecting place in a slough near New Westminster. On January 14th, 1942, even though the military leaders and the RCMP brass advised the Prime Minister that the Japanese Americans were not a threat to the security of this country. However, many very racist politicians in the Lower Fraser Valley and Vancouver who influenced and convinced Prime Minister Mackenzie King that all Canadian citizens of Japanese ancestry were to be labeled enemy aliens, and we were to be removed from the coast inland for a minimum distance of 100 miles. A small number of families decided to go to self-supporting camps, and about 1,100 Japanese Canadians elected to come to this district of Lillooet, which included 4 camps. One was McGilvery Falls, located on Anderson Lake, Bridge River, located on Seton Lake, Minto, located up in the mountains near the Braylon Gold Mines, and fourthly, here in East Lillooet. So, just to give you an example, my family consisted of my mother, my grandfather, and 5 siblings. I was the oldest at almost 11 years of age, and the youngest brother, Bob, who is here, was an infant at 3 months of age. It must have been quite a ordeal and responsibility for my mother. The adults were allowed to carry 150 pounds of luggage, and the children 75 pounds of luggage. So my mother and our family boarded the Union Steamship's vessel in Vancouver, and we traveled to Squamish, which at the time was the terminus of the PGE, or Pacific Great Eastern Railway. From there, it was an overnight train journey to the town of Lillooet. Being very naive, I thought, well, it won't be too bad living in this town of Lillooet. But to my dismay, we were all put on the back of a truck and taken 4 miles across the river to our internment camp called East Lillooet. Being a self-supporting camp, all the families had to pay for the construction of their tar paper shacks. The menfolk also built a 2-room elementary school which housed grades 1 to 8. There were no qualified teachers at that time, so anybody with a high school education became teachers. And because of early discrimination in the town, the young teenagers of high school age missed out on their high school education. I'm sure my parents' generation thought that the war will be short and their life savings will tide them over till the end of the war, but we still kept being enemy aliens for an extra 4 years. I started grade 9 in 1945, and I graduated from Lillooet High School, a 1-room schoolhouse, in 1949. Most of the families had financial difficulties, so I took the next 2 years out of school and helped my father as a deckhand on his boat. In 1944, before the war ended, the racist politicians were already planning as to what to do with these internees, squanching the government money. And they finally came to a decision that all these families in the government-sponsored camps have to be moved out of this province of BC. They were given 2 choices. One was to be deported back to Japan, and some people had no choice because they were in prisoner of war camps in Angler, Ontario. The second choice was that you can't stay in this province. You have to go east of the Rockies. So some families tried to escape that and left their camps early to go to live in Okanagan, the Vernon area. It's hard to believe when I read commentaries made by these politicians at that time that it was almost an ethnic cleansing of the Japanese Canadians from this province. Luckily for the people living in self-supporting camps like East Lillooet, we were allowed to stay together as a family, and so we survived the internship till 1949.
Japanese Canadians were not permitted to return to the coast until 1949, 4 years after the war ended. Less than half of those interned returned to the coast. Many were deported to Japan or were forced to disperse across Canada. My family on both sides came back to Vancouver in 1949, 1950 and built a new life from scratch. My parents told us stories of their experiences in East Lillooet and Minto, how our dad worked in the ice house, or how my mom picked tomatoes in the hot Lillooet sun to help the family, or how in their tar paper shack with no insulation, they heated up stones in the freezing winters and wrapped them in blankets and put them in their beds to warm them up because there were icicles on the inside of the house. This legacy space was created to tell the story of what happened 75 years ago. The 5 self-supporting sites we are remembering here today are East Lillooet, Bridge River, Minto, McGillivray Falls, and Taylor Lake. Approximately 1,100 Japanese Canadians relocated to this area. Both sides of my family, on my mom and dad's side, and many of you who are here today, are descendants of those 1,100 people.
Many times they wanted to exterminate us, but we're still here. And it's our spirituality, the symbolism of the medicine wheel, that have kept our people going and present here today to welcome you. And during that 500 years of persecution, we lost many of our people. And it was at the tail end of that 500 years as they began to close down the residential schools, where they took us from our homes and placed us away from our families. So when I look at the pictures that are on the poster, and I see those children in that picture, I'm looking at us. That's what our children looked like when they were taken away from our homes. But we're glad that Canada and the provinces have become to start to reconcile that. And I'm really glad that they're reconciling this with you. So to the Japanese representatives here, it's very honorable to have you in our territory. You are always welcome. And I'm glad for this day, for it is an important day for the Japanese people, as it is to the people here in Lillooet, in the world, and especially the Slatyan people. So thank you very much for coming and taking the time out of your busy schedules to be here.